At Burwood Girls High School, we embrace our multiculturalism and diversity, but we also recognise racism and more specifically casual racism within our community. Racism is the expression of an internalized contempt for another race on the basis of distrust, stereotyping, inexperience, fear, or a social normalization of a joke against the race. Nowadays, this can be seen as a projection of the underlying racism that exists in society.
These responses are only a small number of the more than 100 survey results we receive from students and staff, highlighting their experiences and witnesses to casual racism within our very own school. These incidents are jarring to read and truly display the prevalence of casual racism in a community that should be a safe and inclusive environment for all students and staff alike. With COVID-19 especially, we have seen a huge increase in racism towards Asian communities across the world and the projection of negative stereotyping and prejudice. International students are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of this, and our survey results shed light onto the countless incidents that occur and are often left unaddressed by our wider school community.
You know, we really didn't talk about it much in my course. I think they introduced the idea to teachers that our classrooms and our schools should be inclusive environments, but they don't really talk about what that means.
Yeah.
And they don't really talk about how you should discuss racism in the classroom. So I think everyone wants to do the right thing, but I don't know that we give students or teachers the tools they need to do it.
I've seen some situations of casual racism in class, as I said, like offhand jokes.
What's, for example, like in the educational context?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, for example, if you had a cohort and a portion of those students, a minority of those students were of ethnic background, of a certain type of ethnicity, and maybe in the staff room you might have heard a teacher being like, oh, those students, they just don't want to learn because of race or something like that.
I think I've experienced casual racism a few times, and when I was younger especially, and you don't really know that it's racism, you just think, oh, why are they doing that to me? So it was more like, oh, the way you look, or for example, I didn't study like
racism, and I think people are just not understanding, I mean, and we have to rise above it, but it's difficult for some, especially for young people, to understand how hurtful it is.
The impacts of casual racism can lead students to feel isolated, alienated, and disconnected. On a larger scale, this results in distinct separations and a lack of cohesion amongst the community, as these internalized prejudices and stereotypes can carry within BIPOC students for the rest of their lives, continuing systemic racism within our wider society.
To address the issue of casual racism, we believe there needs to be 3 areas of change in the education system: what students are learning, more specifically within the PDHB curriculum, teacher and ARCO training, and the school's policy with dealing with racial issues.
The current anti-racism policy states that all teachers are responsible for supporting students to develop an understanding of racism and discrimination and the impacts of these may have on individuals and broader community. Principals are responsible for examining school practices and procedures to ensure they are consistent with the policy. All schools have an anti-racism contact officer who is trained to respond to concerns in relation to racism. Tackling racism is only briefly mentioned in the anti-bullying procedure. This means that the teachers that do not receive a procedure training on how to deal with these issues are not equipped to do so, and hence why won't be addressing the issue. Anti-racism officers aren't publicised. This means that people who are facing casual racism are not aware that they can seek help and report these issues. The PDPHE curriculum has very few lessons on unlearning and dealing with racism, and it essentially focuses on how racism is a bad thing and does not necessarily goes on to tell us the whys and the hows of it, which limits people's knowledge and understanding of racism, again leading to our communal problem of casual racism. Current procedure is not working. The anti-racism policy delegates that principals and teachers are responsible for tackling racism in their school and reporting on progress. However, it's not always done.
The cycle of racism relies on racist attitudes being passed down through generations, and one way to combat this is to utilize schools as a way to re-educate students who may hold ingrained racist beliefs. We aim to achieve this by making changes to the PDHB curriculum. PDHB is a mandatory subject that is taught through years 7 to 10, but its curriculum currently has minimal education on racism, and focuses mainly on obvious racism rather than casual racism. PDHPE has the potential to re-inform all school students with strong and consistent anti-racist teachings. Instead of the current curriculum, we aim to include POC-led class discussions and education on prejudice, systemic racism, and privilege. This worksheet is a sample of what the work in our proposed PDHB curriculum would look like. This particular lesson discusses privilege. The students would watch an educational video on privilege and then answer the questions in their worksheet. After the video, there is a physical activity which incorporates the practical element of PDHB. The activity is a demonstration of how privilege affects people's lives and includes reflection questions to help students recognize their own privilege.
Out of the 90 students who completed the survey, 90% stated that they would like to learn about casual racism in class. Conversations about racism belong in a classroom. When there is silence and a lack of education regarding the issues and impacts of casual racism, it can be as destructive as the actual racism itself. The survey results showcases that students are willing to learn about casual racism and have it included in their curriculum. Schools should be playing an active role and have the responsibility to educate students about the racism that exists within our society, and that may exist internally within themselves.
Does the teaching degree itself identify how to deal with these sort of issues?
Not that I can recall. So we looked at a lot of Indigenous perspectives, which was insightful, but they didn't really go into practical ways that you can address it. It was sort of just talk to the person above.
You know, we really didn't talk about it much in my course. I think they introduced the idea to teachers that our classrooms and our schools should be inclusive environments, but they don't really talk about what that means. And they don't really talk about how you should discuss racism in the classroom. So I think everyone wants to do the right thing, but I don't know that we give students or teachers the tools they need to do it.
It does not explicitly provide much in terms of how to cope with racism in the school while you're teaching as a teacher, or even how to approach it when you see racism being practiced among students. It's just something that you have to learn.
But I really don't specifically remember racism ever really being explicitly brought up. Big, open, in-your-face racism is easier to spot, is easier to act upon, and easier to call out. It's the subtle, casual racism or systemic racism that becomes a much more challenging and difficult thing. And the ARCO training, at least when I did it back when the dinosaurs were young, didn't actually cover that or discuss that at all. It just didn't happen.
As we just heard in the video, teachers' training, similar to the PDHB curriculum, only scratches the surface of how to fight and unlearn racism in schools. The new proposed teacher training should include useful strategies to address not just blatant racism, but also casual racism, which is far more prevalent on campus. The training should include scenario-based learning situations to prepare teachers for in-school situations, so they can feel ready to confront students about both overt and covert racism. We also propose that the training include perspectives from various different ethnicities and also inform teachers about how to confront and cope with racism in the staff room. A change in teacher training will help stamp out the issue of casual racism in our community by equipping teachers with anti-racist knowledge before they even enter schools, therefore ensuring that racism is not tolerated or passed on in a school environment.
The proposed policy change refers to making the ARCO training more relevant and specific to a wider range of racism and inclusivity. This equips the ARCOs with the relevant skills, allowing the ARCOs to address problems like casual racism within the school community with efficiency and directly. The ARCOs and their roles need to be highlighted. Students need to be aware of what to be done when they experience or witness casual racism. The publicity of these officers will allow many students to come forward and talk about the issue of casual racism being regularly faced and allow these issues to be addressed in a better manner. It's creating stricter and mandatory anti-racism curriculum and procedure for all schools will allow schools to be more inclusive and make the community a better place for all minorities, free of the fear of casual racism and it not being addressed, again making our community more inclusive.
On the issue of casual racism within the education system, we are promoting a more inclusive society.